Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Amourgis, Senior Research and Extension Officer with Southern Farming Systems. We've just had a fantastic presentation from Dr. Chris Preston, who's really set the scene for the rest of the topics for today. So today, we're going to focus on for the rest of the session, sort of that weed management and specifically looking at a few new herbicide options as well. So a product which Chris has just touched on as well is Overwatch, so FMC's new herbicide. And we're lucky to have today with us Hugh Palmer from FMC, Product Manager, and he's going to talk us through a little bit more about their experiences and just some further information on the product. So similarly with Chris, if you have any questions throughout, please put them in the chat box. These guys are here to sort of answer some of your questions as well as present some of this data and information. So yeah, definitely ask questions if you've got them. So I will hand over to Hugh.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks to the SFS team for having me. So yeah, a bit of an Overwatch in-season update. We've had a huge launch this year of Overwatch, being a new mode of action. There was a genuine need for it out in the market. And as a result, we've ended up with about 1.2 million hectares across the country. So obviously, quick update on Overwatch, new mode of action, 14 weeds, including annual ryegrass on the label into wheat, barley and canola. Over about 95 field trials in Australia since 2014. So Australia was actually the first country to launch this new mode of action bixazone globally. So that's pretty exciting for us and plenty of learnings to be had from that. We're currently doing some follow-up trials for some of the recropping work, but the favour beans and field peas project is just about wrapped up. So we're looking to have favours and field peas on the label for next year. But we'll just have to have confirmation from the APVMA, which is expected in early next year. Last year, we conducted over 100 8-hectare demonstration sites across the country, which was a great opportunity for growers and agronomists to get their hands on a little bit larger volumes of Overwatch. It's always tricky in that when you're still in that development phase to actually get the volume of product to get out across the country pre-registration. But that was a pretty big project for us last year. Overwatch, it's been a big development project and program. SFS have had Overwatch in their trials for a number of years. And we really thank them for their part in the development process. So for me today, this presentation is really about a bit of an update of where we're at through the season. Put some sort of a few of the facts out on the table about what's been going on. I guess, had you been watching Twitter as your main source of information, you probably think that half the 1.2 million hectares of Overwatch treated crop were probably burnt to the ground. When in actual fact, there's around 40 reported concerns. And I say about because, some are still coming in, some are still being assessed. But what that makes up is a bit less than 1% of the total Overwatch treated area that's gone out. Of those reported cases, barley make up the vast majority of those. And I'll touch on some of the reasons that Chris mentioned earlier, but definitely barley has been of more concern, and we're following through with some of those concerning paddocks. There was a small number of wheat and canola reports that came in, people uncomfortable with the level of bleaching early on, but much less of a concern, and there has been some really good crop recovery there. Overwatch being a bleacher, you see the picture on the left there, you see what it does to the ryegrass, but also, more than often you'll see that bleaching effect in the crop. We were fully aware and ready that there would be a number of growers out there that would be uncomfortable with that level of bleaching up front, and we knew that we'd have a busy team out there on the ground following up throughout the season with a number of growers. As I said, most of these crop issues are recovering, but there are some out there that in certain areas, there's a lot of learnings to be had, and they're not looking fabulous. And the FMC team are following those throughout the season through to harvest, and we'll certainly be doing the right thing by those growers where there is legitimate issues. Just a quick one on some of the common themes between the paddocks that we've been called out to, and particularly in barley. Chris touched on some of these, so I won't spend too long here, but certainly soil type and light gravelly soils, particularly with barley, where the product has moved down into that into the root zone of the barley, and then you added a fair bit of rainfall on top of that, and you're constantly getting another top-up dose in that crop, and you combine that with some sort of wet, prolonged cold conditions, cloudy conditions. The majority of the issues that we've had have been in areas where they've had a late break. So South Australia, I guess sort of your neighbours to the west, where quite a late break, and so that crop went into relatively cool soils, and then there wasn't those light conditions, and that warmth for that crop to come up, have a bit of bleaching, and then, as Chris explained earlier, grow away from that bleaching. So that really late start in some areas, particularly barley, which is less tolerant to Overwatch than, say, wheat or canola, if the product gets into contact with that germinating seed. Across the country, quite commonly this year, mixes with metribuzin and trifluralin, where there's been quite wet conditions. Overwatch works on the chlorophyll, and everything that you see, the crop effect that you see with Overwatch is all up top, that bleaching that you'll see quite commonly up top. Seeds not germinating is not a hallmark of Overwatch, and it's been interesting this year seeing, I guess, some of the understanding around what does trifluralin do if it comes into contact with my crop, my germinating seed. So a few issues around there, and just some a few more issues. We've had some great results with Callisto in radish. Overwatch does a solid suppression job on radish. You add Callisto in there, it's a really great tank mix for those broadleaf weeds. But then you throw that in a disc system, one barley, Overwatch and barley in a disc system, not advised, and then you throw in that Callisto as well, and we're seeing some pretty ordinary looking paddocks. As I said, positional selectivity, really important. So when you go along, you push treated soil back into the furrow with trailing harrows, particularly in lentil country, where you're using your big heavy rollers, and some of those seeding system issues, depth of seeding, those sorts of things have been common among these problem paddocks. Unfortunately, there have been a number of issues where just pure out and out off-label advice has been given post-sow pre-emergence. Again, the reason why that doesn't work is because you're taking away that positional selectivity that a knife point press wheel, when you're physically throwing that soil out of the furrow, provides. And also a few different, I guess, funny points. It's all about knife point press wheel, and that's what gives you that positional selectivity. But when you throw in a wide point, some of these splitter boots that are out there as well, where it's seeding into the side of the furrow, we have seen a few issues in some of those paddocks as well. And then lastly, off the back of an absolute bumper crop in 2020, in some areas there's just been huge stubble loads. And it's not just affecting Overwatch treated paddocks, where we know that the Overwatch is washing off those stubbles quite well. But there's also a mulching effect that's going on in some of these areas as well. So this picture on the right here, this is just an example of the difference that a huge stubble load can make compared to a cleaner paddock. Just to point out that for Overwatch, we're no different from any of the other, I guess, major launches that have been herbicide launches that have come out on the market over the last 10 or 15 years, probably 20 years even. I guess a really good example there is you think back to the early days of Clearfield and some of the learnings that they had in their first couple of years. Now, Clearfield is really a cornerstone product of many people's herbicide programs. And we're certainly no different. When we scale up, we see things and we learn things in different areas across the country. And we'll take those learnings on board and we'll certainly share them out to growers and agronomists across the country. And just to finish with, again, you know, a big part of my job this year was managing some of that conversation around Overwatch on Twitter and social media. And geez, if that's all you went by, as I said, you know, there's a lot of negativity in some spaces on social media. But when you actually look at the facts of it, and you know, less than 1% of the total area of Overwatch that went out that, you know, that has serious concern around it, there's a hell of a lot of really good stories, and we've seen some really good positive stories coming out around Overwatch and the sort of job that it's been doing out in the paddock that we've been really happy with, and the growers and agronomists using Overwatch have been really happy with. So I'm happy to take some questions now.
Thanks very much for that, Hugh. So we do have a few questions that sort of come through. I guess just touching on that development of registering it into other crops. You sort of mentioned pulses and that sort of thing. Is there any further details on sort of timeframes on that as well?
Yeah, so we're expecting the favours and field pea registration to come through early next year, Q1 next year, just depending on that APVMA timing. But that's all looking really good. Favours in particular, Overwatch looking very, very safe in that crop. As far as other pulses in the running, only 2 years ago, lupins were still in the running in that development process. We saw a few too many sites where just too much crop effect, so they were pulled, and probably one season earlier than that was lentils, and lentils got pulled from that program pretty early as well. So it's a definite no for lentils and lupins if you were thinking of doing a bit of experimenting on your own farm.
Yeah, sure. No, good information. There's also been some sort of suggestions regarding reducing rates of Overwatch, so below recommended rates, to try and, I guess, reduce some of that bleaching in crops. So what are your recommendations and sort of thoughts on this?
Yeah, I got a couple of different angles in response to that one. I mean, firstly, Overwatch is particularly rate responsive product. So people probably would have seen on their own paddocks where you get that 2x rate as you've slowed down at the end of a run or started up, and you've got that high rate, and you'll get a lot more crop effect in those areas. Well, it works the same way on the other end of the spectrum. You start pulling down rates of Overwatch, you're just not going to get that effectiveness or that reliability in ryegrass. And so from a resistance management point of view, we've all heard the stories of different products over the years where people have gone off their own bat to lessen the rates. You're not getting the same level of control, but you're still selecting out, and Chris would have some good comments on that, but selecting out those more resistant populations. I really don't think it's a great idea.